Joining us now is criminal defense attorney, friend of the program, our good friend David Schoen is back with us. Also, investigative reporter, Fox News contributor, Sara Carter. Is there anything I'm missing here? Isn't there part of the FISA law that says that you have to only present truthful information, corroborated information, verified information to a FISA judge? And didn't they have an obligation to inform those judges, both in the initial application, 3 subsequent applications, that in fact Hillary had paid for this when they knew she paid for it?
Absolutely, Mr. Hannity. That's a requirement in every application. Every judicial officer or agent makes.
Is that a crime? Did James Comey admit that a crime was committed?
I'd have to hear the whole interview, I suppose, but he's running roughshod over the law. That's for clear. And I have to point out that standard is heightened, as you just said, for the FISA court for good reason, because it's a secret court. It's done ex parte, as many applications are, but it's done ex parte there with extraordinary consequences.
But he's admitting even today he doesn't know. It might be possible, meaning the truthfulness in the dossier. Most of it's been debunked. But if he doesn't know today that it happened, how did we get 4 FISA warrants if that was the bulk of information used to get the FISA warrants?
That's right. And at a minimum, it's a dereliction of duty. He certainly didn't fulfill his obligations or ensure that the obligations were fulfilled by anyone else in it. And going back to your earlier question, I think, about whether he had an obligation to tell Mr. Trump that the dossier was paid for by political opponents, of course there's an obligation there. You want to put all of the facts out. Would anyone argue reasonably that that's not a relevant fact in this equation?
Well, I mean, it's a very relevant fact. I mean, Sara, this is something you broke in March of 2017, the whole story that Trump Tower had, in fact, been wiretapped. We've known this now for over a year. Now we learn from the former Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe. He was the one that was quoted as saying that without the dossier, there wouldn't have been a FISA application. And now we're learning from Comey, not only did they not tell the FISA court judge in the original application and subsequent applications that, in fact, Hillary paid for that information, but they never told the judge that this information was unverified and never corroborated, and it was put together by a foreign national that used Russian and Russian government sources to obtain it.
It's incredible, isn't it? And the fact that Comey just so callously in the interview admits that, even when he briefed President-elect Trump on this dossier, that's unverified, that's salacious, that was actually information that was given to the British spy, Christopher Steele, ex-British spy by the Russians. He doesn't even tell him, well, guess what? Beyond me briefing you on this was also paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC. Sean, this is incredible. And, what David Schoen brought up earlier is so important because it is true. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, you have to have extraordinary evidence that in order to spy on someone. And they turn over this dossier, which hasn't even been verified, and then you don't have to defend you. So it's like Carter Page, the FBI is turning over all of this information, which is unverified, to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. They're withholding information, and there's nobody really there on behalf of the person that's being spied on, in this case, Carter Page, to fight back and say, okay, this is bogus, this is a complete lie, just ask me these questions or let my attorney present you with some facts so that I can fight this, so that you're not listening in on my phone calls, so that you're not taking my emails. And I think what we saw was extraordinary. If this is where our FBI and intelligence community is going with investigations, we should be very concerned about this.
Let me bring up something else that made news by McClatchy, and they were suggesting that, in fact, the president's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, may have, in fact, gone to Prague and met somebody from Russia. But Michael Cohen had said now publicly that is absolutely not true. He's never been to Prague. He never met with any such official, and saying that he has proof that he was in Los Angeles at the time with his son. What are we to make of that, David? Because it would be a big story if, in fact, he had tweeted out a picture of his passport that had no entry point into Prague anywhere at any time in the past. So, is this just a he said, she said? I got to believe it's something verifiable very quickly, isn't it?
That's right, 100%. It can't be a he said, she said. From my perspective, I simply wish the lawyer would not have come out with that public statement. What I'd much prefer would be to commit the Mueller team to that position, commit the Mueller team to a date and time in which Michael Cohen was in Prague, with Michael Cohen holding the evidence that he absolutely was not there that day, how badly would that undermine the credibility of anything else that came out of that investigation, since the Mueller team would have put that forward as a highly material fact. If there's no credibility to that, there's no credibility to the rest of the allegations, arguably, against Michael Cohen.
Well, then who's leaking that information to McClatchy? I mean, McClatchy's considered a news service, aren't they?
Absolutely. And one of the things I did was I reached out to the special counsel and I asked them specifically, this appears to be coming from the special counsel or somebody closely connected to the special counsel. Can you, for a fact, back up the McClatchy story? They declined to comment. I asked them again. I said, listen, either way, this is a big story. Either he was in Prague or he wasn't in Prague. And if people from the special counsel are leaking this information to specific news outlets, it would be beneficial for all news outlets to know the truth now. So somebody has to answer, and then, which they respectfully declined to comment again.
Well, we're not getting a whole lot of information about them. I got to take a break. We'll come back. We'll have more with Sara Carter and David Schoen on the other side. Continue with investigative reporter Sara Carter and, of course, civil and criminal rights attorney David Schoen. All right. So was there anything, Sara, as you were watching this whole thing last night, to me, it's almost impossible that we never got to the fact that Hillary paid a foreign national, Christopher Steele, for what turned out to be Russian lies to manipulate the American public in a lead up to a presidential election. And Comey didn't know then and doesn't know now if that information presented to the FISA court is true. Where's the investigation into the mishandling of that?
Well, and where were the questions, right? I mean, this was a man who headed the FBI. I mean, this was the buck stops at his desk, right? And he was in charge of, obviously, this is an investigation into the president-elect. So he would, and he should, know what's going on in this investigation. What about Lisa Page and Peter Strzok and their text messages back and forth? What about beyond just McCabe, the enormous amount of evidence that the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, collected on him and his lies? What about the leadership? I mean, you want to talk about a higher authority and moral standing and being able to teach an ethics class. What about the fact that you ran an FBI division? I mean, you're the top dog in the United States. You're the top sheriff. You're the top guy. And your FBI was full of people on the 7th floor that were lying, people who've been demoted, people who have been fired, people who were mishandling an investigation. I mean, this is the real thing. I mean, his narrative was that he's this very moral guy and he's calling out the president on his character, when if anything, he was but that. I mean, look at Comey. The very first impression he got of President Trump, the very first thing he said was he made fun of his hair, he made fun of his tan, he talked about the way he looked. He sounded like a jilted high school person that had just been dumped by someone. He didn't sound like an authority from the FBI who had any evidence whatsoever to target the president, a duly elected president of the United States. And secondly, Sean, I think what was most disturbing to me, really disturbing to me, is that he continued to pontificate and make allegations against the president, not based on fact, based on his feelings and hearsay and disinformation. This is like a really incredible disinformation campaign that was not only perpetuated by Comey, but people like McCabe, Brennan, Clapper, all of them making allegations against a duly elected president without one shred of evidence, at all.
It's well said. The Republican National Committee has been ripping into Comey's comments during this TV appearance, and I think that Sara, David, has hit this pretty good and highlighted this. All of this misconduct happened under his watch. And if you look at some of the things that he has said, Comey testified he'd never been asked to. He said that, and then he also said he admitted that when pressed, that neither Trump nor his staff asked him to stop the Russia investigation. Comey said at the time that Trump asked him to let this go, but that Trump did not order him to do so. So it's like, Comey is kind of caught, with these repeated contradictions on big issues, and he leaves the impression that bad things happen, but then contradicts his own self and backs off it.
Very sloppy work for a man who's held those positions, who we've put in those positions. And I have to say, you're right. Sara Carter has hit it on the head. Once again, I really pity Mr. Comey trying to take any higher moral ground with Sara Carter after him checking facts. And you, Mr. Hannity, frankly, it's a disgrace what Mr. Comey is doing. Mr. Comey appears to be all about Mr. Comey, and the country doesn't really seem to matter. The integrity of the office doesn't seem to matter. This is a spectacle. It shouldn't be happening from someone who held that position. It's about profit-making. and so on. But I think the interview also, we have short-term memories about history. Should Mr. Stephanopoulos really have been conducting that interview?
You mean the guy that ran the Clinton war room and the guy that used to be the press secretary for the Clintons, that guy?
That guy. Should that have been the interviewer?
No, in short. Thank you very much. We'll see you both on Hannity tonight. We'll have full coverage, what the media will never share with you. The questions that should have been asked in last night's interview that weren't, we'll have that, and the inconsistencies of James Comey. That's all coming up 9 Eastern on Fox. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back.